Founder and executive director of the National Security Institute, Jamil Jaffer, joins us now to talk about that significant trip. Good morning, sir. Thank you for joining us.
Morning, Mitch. Thanks for having me.
Well, let's just start with the significance of it. We've never seen this before, as far as I remember, a president going into an active war zone like this. What does it mean?
Well, obviously a big deal designed to demonstrate U.S. resolve supporting Ukraine. A number of allied leaders have already visited Ukraine, including the presidents of France, Germany, the UK, the prime minister there. The first lady also has gone. And so President Biden going and announcing this new package of aid, about over $400 million worth of additional aid, military aid to Ukraine, obviously designed to show the strength of the coalition standing behind President Zelensky and his forces in Ukraine.
Yeah, I found it really interesting, this trip. They told Russia ahead of time that Biden was going, which you would think if you didn't want anyone to find out, it would be the Russians. But is that how this works? Do you say, we're going to send our president over there, you better not attack or that's an act of war, and that gets the other country to back off?
Well, at some level, that's part of what's going on. They certainly don't want an international incident growing out of a mistaken effort by the Russians. At the same time, they were trying to send a message to the Russians, so letting them know ahead of time gives them an opportunity to protest, which they clearly did. You've got President Putin there talking about the fact that the Western alliance is causing this war to get worse, that it's the fault of NATO and the allies, the way this war has gone. Of course, that is true at some level, which is to say that the Russians would have hoped this war was over in 3 days or 3 weeks. It's gone on for a year, in part because the Ukrainians have shown a tremendous fighting spirit, and in part because we've supplied the Ukrainians, the United States and our allies, with a significant amount of weaponry to respond to this uncalled for Russian aggression there in Ukraine.
And Jamil, this is more what we pledged, almost $500 million of additional aid. It's a lot of stuff that we've already sent over there, right? We're not talking F-16s and things here. It's money and it's weapons and Javelin missiles and things that we have already sent there. It's just more of it. That's my understanding of it. Is that correct?
That's exactly right, Mitch. There may be a few additional items like anti-armor equipment, but the bulk of what's being supplied is more ammunition to supply the weapons we've already provided. What isn't there yet thus far is a commitment to speed up the supplying of the tanks that we promised, the M1s, the United States has promised, the Challenger 2 tanks from the UK and the Leopard 2s from the Germans. Those tanks can make a huge difference on the battlefield. And President Zelensky at the Munich Security Conference last week called for speeding up the delivery of those. And he also has asked for consistently, as you point out, Mitch, correctly, fighter jets as well as longer range missiles to be able to strike the Russians inside of Russia where they're launching attacks against Ukraine.
And President Putin just gave his version of the State of the Union address in Moscow, and he mentioned this war and he blamed the West for it, even though that's not true. What happens if China gets involved in the way the United States has, and this becomes a proxy war between the United States and China? Is that a possibility, and what happens if that happens?
Well, Mitch, it's certainly a possibility, and we heard Secretary Blinken for the first time lay out the case that Chinese companies are supplying non-lethal military aid to Russia today for the war, flak jackets, helmets, and the like, and that the United States has intelligence to believe that the Chinese are going to try to supply lethal weaponry if they believe they can get away with it. Obviously, now they've been called out, it'll be harder for them to get away with it, but the Chinese also made clear, look, you can't tell us, to the United States, said their top diplomat, Wang Yi, you can't tell us what to do. If we choose to provide supplies, we're going to do so. It's now becoming increasingly fraught, that situation. And it may very well be the case that the Chinese up the ante. If they do that, that could force the U.S. to double down and could lead to a cycle of escalation there in the region and potentially in a larger situation.
Well, yeah, and then the war never ends, and then it gets more and more violent and more people die.
Well, this is exactly the challenge, Mitch. We did not supply this weaponry ahead of the conflict. We weren't able to deter Russia, in part because we didn't demonstrate that we were there prepared to be in for the long haul. We've now started to up the amount of equipment we're providing, but it's come slowly in dribs and drabs over time. And so the question becomes, do we want the Ukrainians to win, or do we simply want this to be a stalemate? If we want them to win, then now I think, Mitch, is the time to provide them all the equipment, fighter jets and the like, they need to win this conflict in a successful way, or at least take it to the place where the Russians have to negotiate.
And Jamil, the latest information we have is that the president is out of Ukraine. He is in Poland. He's in Warsaw specifically to meet with the Polish president, Andrzej Duda. That's going to happen around 6:50 a.m. Eastern time. It's about 12:50 p.m. Warsaw time. But just after this almost adventure. And I know that's probably not the right word, but just this incredible feat of getting a president in and out of a war zone like this. How does this work logistically? How do you keep this a secret from enough people and yet inform enough people to keep him safe?
Well, what's clear that they were able to pull this off without the media or anybody else finding out that the president was going to Ukraine suggests that there are a lot more U.S. capabilities there, either really right next to Ukraine or inside of Ukraine itself, in order to pull off this kind of an operation. So you're exactly right. It takes a big footprint for the president to get in and out. And I think that's part of what we're seeing here is the fact that we have the capabilities there. We have the supply lines into Ukraine to make this happen on very short notice, or at least without being noticed publicly. It could also be that what's called a press lid was imposed. The press knew about it, but couldn't report on it because of security concerns.
Thanks for watching. Go to newsnationnow.com to find NewsNation in your cable lineup. And don't forget to click the red subscribe button below to get more of NewsNation's fact-based, unbiased coverage.